What's up, everybody, and welcome back. Today, we are getting into an absolute geopolitical and technical firestorm. It all started back in the year 2025, when Nvidia shed $589 billion in market value in a single trading day following DeepSeek's January 2025 debut. It wasn't just a stock market dip. It sparked a bigger question that's now at the center of a geopolitical IP fight. How did a Chinese lab manage to hit frontier-level reasoning performance at about one-tenth the compute cost of its US competitors? And suddenly, everyone in the West, OpenAI, Anthropic, the US government is screaming that this is a massive heist. But the weird part? The so-called theft isn't about hacking servers or stealing hard drives in the middle of the night. It is all about a machine learning technique called modal distillation. So today, we are going to break down the highly technical side of distillation. Why Chinese labs are suddenly dropping massive open weight models for everyone to use, and why a massive chunk of the developer community actually thinks the big US labs are just crying wolf to protect their monopolies. Let's start with the tech. What actually is model distillation? The basic concept is a teacher model that is a huge parameter model that teaches the student model or target model some stuff. The flow is something like this. First, there is a teacher a huge frontier model. It is very smart but expensive. A student asks millions of questions or prompts. The teacher generates answers because the student is paying for it through the API cost. This part is completely transparent, but in actual distillation, things happen way too deep. Suppose the question is, the capital of France is. If the teacher only says Paris, then the student only learns Paris is correct. Everything else is wrong. This is called supervised learning. In actual distillation, the student also learns how sure the teacher is about the answer, what other answers the teacher thought of, and what the probabilities were for those. So the student learns that the teacher was 97.8% sure about Paris, 1.3% sure about Lyon, and so on. This is just a simplified example, mind you. In a real-world scenario, frontier models output millions of such tokens and their probabilities. These probabilities are called logits. What student do after getting these logits? It trains on this data. It goes through millions of iterations. Here, let's zoom into one training step. Prompt: what is the capital of Japan? Teacher model gives token probability something like Tokyo 99.8%, Osaka 0.1%, Kyoto 0.1%. So student model learns Tokyo 72%, Osaka 20%, Kyoto 8%. Student doesn't match teacher. So it goes into backpropagation and adjusts its weights. So in the next iteration, student gets somewhat closer. Tokyo 90%, Osaka 6%, Kyoto 4%. Eventually, student gets something like Tokyo 99%, Osaka 0.5%, Kyoto 0.5%. The student isn't just learning the correct answer. It's also learning how confident the teacher is about every possible answer. Why this is more powerful than normal training? Student learns correct answer, confidence, similar alternatives, and teacher's reasoning patterns. So the next question is, can someone get logits through an API? The answer is no. Most commercial APIs return only the prompt-generated text and chain of thought, but they don't expose full vocabulary logits. For that, you need the teacher's probability distribution. So, how do companies distill models? Usually one of these. Case 1, which is the most common. The teacher is your own model and you have full access. So students can read logits directly and then distill. Case 2. The teacher is open source. You run it locally. Then extract logits. Distill. Case 3. Teacher is a closed source API. You only get the generated text available. Student trains on outputs. It's called synthetic data training. This is not classical logit-based knowledge distillation. One of the examples of classical logit-based knowledge distillation is DeepSeek R1 Distill Quen32b and DeepSeek R1 Distill Llama 70b. DeepSeek generated roughly 800,000 samples from their large DeepSeek R1 teacher model to train smaller student architectures, specifically using Alibaba's Quen and Meta's Llama frameworks. So, what is the actual drama here? Well, OpenAI and Anthropic are accusing DeepSeek and other Chinese labs like Moonshot AI and Minimax of using their proprietary US models as the teachers without permission. Basically, they allege these labs set up obfuscated third-party routers and thousands of burner accounts to rapidly fire millions of complex queries at their APIs. Anthropic actually released research claiming that just 3 Chinese labs made over 16 million queries to Claude using about 24,000 fake accounts to harvest training data. The US government is now heavily involved, with Trump administration tech official Michael Kratsios publicly accusing Moonshot AI of extracting capabilities from Anthropic's Claude Fable 5 to build their new Kimi K3 model. But here is the rhetorical question we really have to ask. Is this actually illegal? Is model distillation intellectual property theft? Well, according to legal scholars, the answer is mostly no. And this is where the conversation gets incredibly spicy. You see, the US Copyright Office has firmly stated that copyright law only protects original human-authored works. Because AI-generated outputs don't have human authorship. So, if a Chinese lab scrapes millions of AI-generated responses from ChatGPT, they aren't copying protected expression. They are copying functional outputs and behavioral mimicry, which traditional copyright just does not cover. What about trade secrets, like under the Defend Trade Secrets Act? Legal experts point out that distillation treats the teacher model as a black box. It doesn't steal the proprietary model weights, the source code, or the internal algorithms. Because these outputs are freely returned to anyone paying to use the public-facing API, it is really hard to legally argue that those outputs are a closely guarded trade secret. The only real legal weapon these US companies have is a breach of contract. Both OpenAI and Anthropic have explicit terms of service saying you cannot use their outputs to train competing models. But terms of service violations are incredibly hard to enforce internationally, especially against entity operating outside US jurisdiction. Some lawmakers have suggested using the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, or CFAA, because of the fake accounts and obfuscated routers. But that targets unauthorized access and hacking, not intellectual property theft. As one legal analyst from Lawfare put it, if every terms of service violation counts as theft, then the concept has absolutely no limiting principle. They fundamentally cannot be copyrighted. And this brings us directly to the developer community. Developers are fiercely pushing back against these theft claims. They are calling the distillation panic completely ridiculous and framing it as corporate propaganda designed to save overpriced AI IPOs. The analogy floating around is that distilling an AI is exactly like a college student learning from a professor. The student paid the tuition, The professor taught them what they wanted to learn, and the professor can't suddenly sue the student for IP theft just because the student goes on to have a successful career. Many developers argue that generating synthetic training data from one model to train another is just standard legitimate industry practice. Elon Musk even admitted on the witness stand recently that basically all AI companies distill each other. The open source community deeply suspects that the real reason US companies are panicking is because their business models are existentially threatened. Having open weight alternatives destroys the perceived moat of Western tech monopolies, pulling down their margins and completely disrupting their accounting smoke and mirrors. Which leads us to the grand geopolitical strategy. Why is China pushing out state of the art models like DeepSeek R1, Kimi K3, and Alibaba's Qwen 3.8 Max completely open weight? Ben Thompson over at Stratechery had a brilliant economic breakdown of why China is doing this. He argues that China's primary strategy is to turn intelligence into a pure commodity. In the AI world, NVIDIA's tokens themselves aren't actually a commodity because different models require drastically different amounts of chain of thought tokens to reach the exact same correct answer. What is fungible, what is commoditized, is the final correct answer, the intelligence itself. And the cost of goods sold, or COGS, for that intelligence depends on inference efficiency, memory efficiency, like reducing KV cache requirements, and architectural choices like mixture of experts. In commodity markets, price is strictly determined by supply and demand. If supply is higher than demand, the price of the commodity goes down, right? So by releasing highly capable open weight models, Chinese labs are aggressively driving the market price of intelligence down to zero. Thompson points out that Chinese President Xi Jinping recently gave a speech explicitly encouraging open source AI as a way to integrate AI into the physical world. And you know who dominates the physical world? China, through their massive lead in physical manufacturing and robotics. Their grand strategy is a classic business move: commoditize your complement. If AI software intelligence is virtually free, the real economic value shifts to hardware and robotics, where China has a massive structural advantage. They are effectively destroying US software profit margins to boost their own hardware dominance. But actually, is distillation even the main reason Chinese models are catching up? According to Helen Toner, who used to be on OpenAI's board and recently testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee, distillation definitely provides a boost. But it is far from the only factor. Chinese AI scientists are genuinely innovative on their own. The developer community echoes this, noting that China has massive amounts of training data, a huge pool of PhDs and STEM graduates, incredibly low energy costs to run data centers, and way less red tape or safety guardrails. Toner warns that hyper-focusing on distillation is actually a dangerous policy distraction. The real existential threats to US intellectual property are traditional cyber-intrusions and malicious insider threats. For example, in early 2024, a Chinese national named Lin Wei-ding was convicted of systematically exfiltrating massive amounts of trade secrets related to Google's proprietary TPU AI hardware. And just recently, Mercor, a major provider of AI training datasets for leading US companies, was hacked, losing 4 terabytes of crucial data. These direct thefts of algorithmic secrets, model weights, and hardware designs are infinitely more damaging than just querying a public API to generate synthetic training data. And the ultimate irony in all this panic, by trying to lock down US models and restrict API usage in the name of security, US actively pushing Western developers toward Chinese models. There was a recent incident where the major AI platform Hugging Face was breached by an autonomous AI agent. When their incident response team tried to use US frontier models to analyze the attack logs, the US model's strict safety guardrails actually blocked them, mistaking the incident responders for the attackers. So, what did Hugging Face have to do? They used the open weight GLM 5.2 model from a Chinese lab to secure their own US based infrastructure. That is the exact reality US facing right now. Banning distillation or hyper locking down US models doesn't stop China because they already have the momentum, the talent, and state backing. All it does is cripple Western open weight developers who actually have to play by the rules, forcing them to rely on Chinese models as teachers and putting them at a recurring structural disadvantage. So that's it for today, guys. See you in the next one.